I am here at a table with somebody I've been admiring for a year. It was about a year ago. Will Guidara, restaurateur, author, speaker, maybe the new Simon Sinek, I said. A year ago, my wife takes me on a Sunday and says, watch this, 7 days out, something on Netflix where there's 7 days out from a major event, and it was you, and it was the reopening and the renovation of 11 Madison Park here in New York, top restaurant. Didn't know you at the time. And I was taken back by not just the opening events, but your intensity around getting it right. And then she said, hey, we're going to an event, a weekend event, and he's going to be there with his wife, Christina. And so I was excited about that. And you're a Cornell guy, I'm a Cornell. I was like, I've got to find a way to approach this guy. I had one question I had to ask you. So I'm going to go to this. I'm a big believer, moments you always remember if they crystallize something that changes you, and it changed me. And I said, Will, why in the world did you leave the top restaurant in the world, because you had announced you'd done that.
Yeah.
Everyone's chasing you on hospitality, and you're going to jump into a whole new mission, which you've been on the last year.
Yes.
This whole mission of unreasonable hospitality. And I asked you, how did you do that? And you walked across the bar, and you took your finger and you punched it into my stomach, and you said, there comes a point where you got to trust your gut. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Tell me more. Tell me the essence of why you made this bold move.
Well, so the reference, the reason why I felt like even remotely
got physical with me in the first 5 minutes.
to just poke you in the stomach was years earlier. I was in a meeting with Danny Meyer, who my longtime mentor, who we'll talk about more today, who I believe is one of the great hospitality minds in America, in the world of our time. He was my boss, and I was sitting down with him because I was questioning my next move, and I had a sense of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and it included leaving him. Yeah. And this was a moment where, I mean, most bosses, I was pretty good then, like he wanted me to stay, and that's normally when someone would transition into trying to convince you to not leave. And instead, we talked for a while, and then at the end, he's like, hey, think about it. And then he poked me in the stomach and said, but ultimately just listen to your gut. And that's something I've always tried to carry with me. I think so often we end up at these crossroads, and we can appropriately start to analyze, what does right look like?
Right.
It's a comment my dad has given to me many, many times. Ask yourself what right looks like and do that. But sometimes if we're not careful, we can analyze things to the point that we're just overwhelmed, almost paralysis through analysis. And in those moments, we need to stop thinking with our brains and start listening to our guts. And at that moment in my career, there's this book, Second Mountain by David Brooks, which I love. And if anyone wants to get the idea of the book without reading the entire book, he also wrote an op-ed for the New York Times called The Moral Perils of Meritocracy. And he talks about this idea that everyone that's accomplished anything of real significance in their life doesn't do it on their first mountain. They do it on their second mountain. And there I was, having just turned 40, and I had just been a part of this wild ride, an unbelievable first chapter, first mountain. And I just felt in my gut it was time to embark on my second mountain, which was all about taking everything I'd learned in restaurants around the table and trying to show how that can be applicable to industries so far beyond my own.
And we'll talk about where we are here, but just a second. But you're 40 with one child, another that has come since. Actually, probably one of the most risk-averse windows in human life is we got to get started. I got to get settled. And you were at the top of your first mountain.
Yeah.
What was it? Was it Danny? Was it influencers? What gave you, maybe it's a collection of things, the courage to step out and do that? Because I'm a big believer in no regrets and living a no regrets life. We'll get to that in a minute. But you made a bold move at a time when most people are at the most conservative in their life.
I mean, it was always kind of our narrative. I always, one of my approaches towards business is always reinvest and reinvent before you have to. Do it when you're at the top as opposed to when you're on your way down. And I think that applies not just to how you manage a business, but how you manage your own life. I think when you have the most to lose, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think the other way to look at it is you're standing firmly planted in a position of strength, which gives you the greatest leverage to make a change, to take a risk.
Yeah. I think it's too surrounding, and one of the reasons I'm at this table, one of the first conversations with you is I think it's for me surrounding myself around people that have stories and have made moves that inspire you to say, why not? They did.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing that for a lot of people right now.
I appreciate that. And what you just said actually kind of triggered perhaps the even more meaningful thing around risk, right? Like when people are in a risk-adverse time. Community. If you've surrounded yourself with the right group of people, if you've been intentional in your pursuit of the important relationships, when you're surrounded by a group of people that are smart and talented and who you trust and they trust you and you love them and they love you, I mean, there's not really anything that's that risky because you have an entire community around you who will catch you if you fall or do everything they can to help you succeed.
And you look for it. I mean, I spent the first weekend in a leadership event and a family fun event with you and Christina. And I mean, there's people that can draw and make community. And I think community takes intentionality.
For sure.
And when you start doing that, it's a flywheel. You start drawing more and more people to you. So.
Well, but like I always use the metaphor, anyone who's ever been to Times Square, when you're walking through Times Square and there's just hundreds of people passing you by, every once in a while you need to be able to recognize the person that you want to like grab onto their arm and hold on to them. Yeah. And that's how you start increasing and building community. That's how we've become close. So as we like grabbed onto each other at the end of that event and neither one of us was willing to let go. And now that's led to us being in the back room of a pizza parlor in Brooklyn.
So where are we? Tell us about this table and where we are today.
So we are at a place called Feeney Pizza in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Sean Feeney is a very good friend of mine. He and his partner, Missy Robbins, have two of the most successful Italian restaurants in New York, Missy and Lilia. And he just loves pizza. And so he opened a pizzeria. Now we're in the back room. This is called Friends of Feeney.
What a place.
And this is just like for his community as a gathering place. On these bookshelves back here, basically every friend of Feeney like gave a little token to bring a piece of themselves. He's this big believer in this idea that like give people a place to call their own. And he actually looked for people to invest in that place by giving a piece of themselves to it. One of the things I talk about in the book is this paperweight my dad gave me. What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? He would always ask me to answer that question honestly, and whatever the answer was, to do everything in my power to try to do that, saying that so many people are scared to say their most audacious goals out loud for fear that if they do and don't achieve them, they'll let themselves and those around them down. But he would always go on to say that if you don't have the confidence and conviction to dream big out loud, you'll never achieve your biggest dreams. And so I actually found one of those paperweights, and that's on that bookshelf that I left here. But
so now we got to eat.
Now we got to eat. So in addition to a lot of great pizzas, they make an unbelievable slice of tomato pie. And so here, I'm just going to put that right in your plate.
Very good.
It's special because they have breadcrumbs on the top.
We got in the first pizza of the day, right? They came in early here for us. So.
They made us pizza early. But Sean, in addition to being a really good friend, is someone who, he just is obsessed with hospitality, just like I am. He's one of these guys that has made a name for himself, not because he's in the back cooking the food, but because he is maniacal around how every one of the stakeholders like feels and how they run their restaurants.
All right, so we're sitting at a table. I'm going to just share a little bit here. I'll let you eat, and I'm just going to kind of put, I see, and I want to kind of just get from you, a table's one of the most powerful, I believe, forces, equalizers, influencers. You know, some of the greatest decisions in history have been made to, I think it shapes people, it shapes leaders. And part of the reason is when you come here, it brings anticipation. I always say a table because it's usually two of the greatest things human beings want, food and community, to your point. It's one of the reasons we talk about, hey, sharing a table, there's probably nothing more sacred. So thank you for sharing one of your favorite tables with me. I guess I would ask you, you know, especially in the hospitality area, you know, tell me a little bit about the meaning of a table through your lens. I mean, what have you seen the power of this and what this can do.
So we're at one of my favorite tables in New York. And I love the whole spirit of this thing you're doing because I similarly believe that this thing, the table,
Yeah.
is both literally and metaphorically one of the most important things that we have, like all of us have
Life. Yeah.
in life. I believe there's a sanctity to the table. And I think
Amen.
it exists for a couple different reasons. Well, I mean, just the idea that this is one of the few places left where people can sit down and stop checking their phones, where people are actually inclined to focus on the food in front of them and the people that they're lucky enough to share that food with. It's one of the reasons why I love restaurants. I think a great restaurant, one that is intentional and creative in creating the conditions for connection, can be a place there where people are brought closer together. I believe a great restaurant, if you and I sit down to eat there, we will be closer to one another at the end of the meal than we were going into it. I think a great restaurant is a place where two people that have been married for a really long time, that have raised kids and maybe like stopped having the ability to focus so much on one another because they've been distracted by everything else that life has brought into their worlds, actually like fall into one another again. I mean, I would love someone to do a study to talk about the world-changing events that have been decided upon over food around a table.
Yeah.
My friends who run Canless Restaurant in Seattle, they talk about like the beautiful things that can happen and how really what we do is just about giving people an invitation to connect with one another over the table.
It's probably one of the hotter Lost Kitchen up in Maine, Freedom, Maine, to things you're doing to them in the Northwest. And I would say, I would even expand it to say, and I know you're going into the business world and the corporate America world, in my office behind my desk, I have a lot of the more important critical tables I've ever sat at with picture selfies of people, but the leadership tables, it's a symbol more of, are we in a circular table or a square table? Are we together looking in on our mission or not? And then I still remember that country table in upstate New York and that farm family. I was in the back to the right. My shaping of my dad was at that dinner table at night. So I think, it broadens beyond a restaurant even, I think, in terms of.
And I think like one of the things that leaders can do in their companies is actually take the lessons from the round tables and apply them to the square tables.
Wow.
I believe that leadership has changed, right? Especially in this post-pandemic world where people are working remotely or these hybrid workplaces, the idea that the people you work with will genuinely connect with one another organically is no longer accurate, right? There was a long time when you could rely on the fact that your team would feel a sense of connection and community to and with one another, just by virtue of the conversations that happen around the proverbial water tower or after work at happy hour. That no longer happens organically in most places. It now requires the leader to be intentional in bringing their people together. It requires the leader being a great host of people. And so, I do think all tables have the capacity to be transformational, but that doesn't happen in the absence of intention.
No. So I have to ask, because I'm a Cornell guy and the Statler Hotel and the restaurant, and the greatest story I've ever read in a book about a table came from Unreasonable Hospitality, and the story of the decision you made, if you wouldn't mind telling it, around I'm not going to Spain. I'm taking my dad, and we're going to go have 4 hours at a table.
Yeah.
I think that I've had more recollection of that from people that I've passed this book out to than any story.
Oh, that's amazing.
Can you?
Yeah. Daniel Boulud, who I believe is just one of the great chefs of our time, not just because he's a great cook, but because he's always been a great leader. This guy who, in spite of his remarkable success, never stopped kind of centering himself in generosity towards either organizations he cared about or the people that worked for him or the younger generation coming up.
And you knew about him while you were at Cornell.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
To the point where we had a class called Guest Chefs. And every year, the Guest Chefs class would host 3 chefs from around America. They'd come up one at a time and do a dinner. And those of us in the class, we worked those dinners. And one of those dinners, you were assigned to be on the management team. Every year, one of the chefs was a really big chef. And my semester, it was Daniel Boulud. I was the manager for him. I was on the marketing team. Okay. Marketing Daniel Boulud in Ithaca doesn't require much work at all. That dinner is going to sell out very quickly. So I decided that my role, instead of marketing it, was entertaining him and his crew. And they came up, and I just tried everything I could to roll out the red carpet, which when you're a college kid without many resources, that's limiting. And so what I decided to do was, let's just give them the experience that maybe they all missed from when they were our age. And we threw a keg party for them at my house. And
there were scrambled eggs and the whole, right?
I mean, Danielle and I drove back up to the hotel after the dinner, broke into the kitchen, took pots and pans and eggs and truffles and mushrooms and caviar. And Danielle Boulud cooked in my kitchen for about 200 drunk college kids.
And was it a typical college Ithaca college kid house?
Yeah.
The contrast.
Literally, I don't even know if I wrote this in the book, but at one point he opened a kitchen cabinet and the door fell off the hinge. And that's not an exaggeration. And he's like, Winnie, what the? And at the end he said, hey, you come and see me. Yeah. And I graduated from Cornell. My mother had been a quadriplegic my entire life, since I was 9 or something. She wasn't meant to live as long as she did, but it became clear as I got older and she kept on living that she was dead set on seeing her only son grow up at least as much as she possibly could. And I mean, towards the end, my mom couldn't walk or talk or anything. She and I always had a special mother-son connection. I could communicate with her long after others were no longer able to.
And probably inspired her to keep till you got through Cornell.
Yeah. And when I graduated high school, we all got very nervous that maybe that was the thing that she was living for. And then they were all ready to come up and see me graduate college. We had a medical van booked and everything. And right before they were getting ready to leave, my mom fell into a coma. I graduated, threw my cap in the air, literally ran to my car, drove to Boston, was with her for a few hours, and she died the next morning. I was meant to go to Spain that summer, and it feels absurd to go to Spain after you've just lost your mom. But my dad actually was the one that said, hey, you can't stop living your life. You gotta go. And if you get there and it just doesn't feel right, you can always come home without judgment. I won't judge you if you give up. Yeah. And that was a big thing coming from him because he did not believe in quitters. He did not believe in using the word I can't, but he had given me grace in that season, which turned out to be the only thing I needed. Knowing that I could quit without judgment was all I needed to ultimately not quit. But by the time he and I had that conversation, I decided to still go to Spain. All the flights out of Boston were booked. And so I booked a flight out of JFK. My dad drove me to New York City. We spent the night and I left the next day. And because we were gonna be in the city for a night, I emailed Danielle and said, hey, can I come to dinner at your place? Yeah. Now, my dad was in the restaurant business his whole life. My dad introduced me to so many things. He was always the one taking me out. Yeah. And then here, suddenly we were in a moment where I, for the first time in my life, was going to bring him somewhere based on my first connection, Yeah. And we walked in, Danielle said, of course, please come. We walked in, they greeted us through the bar, through the dining room, and then into the kitchen. And there was this dining room. It's called the Skybox. One table with this glass window overlooking the kitchen. And there I am, having just graduated college, and Danielle decided to treat me and give me that table with my dad. And 16 courses later, Danielle spieling every single dish.
Oh my God.
No check. We were the last people to leave, not the last guests, but the last people in the entire restaurant. Danielle waited for us. Me, Danielle, and my dad left the restaurant together, and he locked it up. And there we were in what, for all intensive purposes, was the saddest and most difficult season in me and my dad's lives, having had one of the best nights of our lives. And I talk about that story in the book.
Yeah.
Well, because I believe in the power of vulnerability, and I think if you're not willing to share a piece of yourself, you can't expect anyone else to do the same. And I shared that early in the book with intention because I wanted people to open themselves up to me, even as readers. And I felt I first needed to do so in return, but also because I think that night is a perfect embodiment about the power of hospitality. I think whatever you do for a living, you can make the choice to be in the hospitality industry, but no one will ever make that choice unless they understand the profound nobility in making it. I think once you've made that choice, you have an opportunity to create your own little magical world in a world that needs more magic. In the hospitality industry, you have the power to help people celebrate some of the most important moments of their lives. You can make the world a nicer place by being really, really nice to everyone you interact with. Or, and this is what happened that night, you can give people the grace, if only for a few hours, to forget about their most difficult moments and remind them that in a season of sadness, there is always still so much to celebrate.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was the most special table I ever ate at.
Yeah. Powerful. Okay, so you can eat a little bit. I want to ask you. I wrote down something that you said that's maybe a bridge into this whole unreasonable hospitality. I might want to know about the napkin after midnight and a bottle of whiskey gone and where the whole unreasonable hospitality came from. But you say in your book, and this hit me and my wife and I a lot when we heard you say this, the unexpected is more valuable than the expensive. When someone gives us time, when someone gives us energy, the feeling of that gift is overwhelming. Not just to the person receiving it, but also to the person giving it.
Yeah.
And you go on, I've heard you speak, that once this gets kind of part of the fabric of who you are, you're always longing to feed the giving of unreasonable hospitality because it provides something that's so satisfying.
Yeah.
Go there. That's the heart of what this is all about, right? I mean, until someone gets that conversion and feels it and sees it, companies won't change if the person themselves that's leading that company doesn't change. Is that right? And then I want to cross over into where you've been, corporate America and all this. But tell me, I'm trying to get to the essence. Is that the essence of unreasonable hospitality?
I mean, that's the essence of why it sticks. I think if I'm like defining unreasonable hospitality, you look across all disciplines. The people that are the most successful are those that are completely irrationally unreasonable in pursuit of their product.
Yeah.
The ones that are relentless and willing to do whatever it takes to make that product its most fully realized self. Yeah. By the way, service I consider a part of the product.
And you say that's 3 out of 4, 75% of the US industry is service related. Right?
Yes, exactly. And people I'm always inspired when I hear passionate people talk about the lengths they went to make a product as perfect as it can possibly be. And for me, unreasonable hospitality is just me begging the world to start being just as unreasonable in pursuit of how they're making people feel, those that they serve and all the people that they work with in order to serve those people. Now, the question I get often from people is, well, how do you get your team to get on board?
Yeah.
And that's the part, starts because as a leader, I was already addicted to it. But it's about just getting them addicted to it as well. And this is one of those addictions that's actually beautiful, not destructive, but quite the contrary.
And you say showing your team why they do this.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this for the bigger purpose is a big part of the leadership. Is that, and I'm curious, what are you seeing in corporate America? What why has there been such, I mean, you've been a major movement the last 12 months, really outside of the restaurant, you know,
Yes.
and your traditional circles. You're more in the circles I've been in. Why has there been so much interest? You're scratching an itch or a need that's out there. Tell me why.
Well, I think, listen, there's times where something just makes more sense than ever before. And I think we're in one of those moments around hospitality for a bunch of different reasons. Whether it's following the pandemic, where, I mean, listen, during the pandemic, people didn't stop buying things. You look at Amazon's share price during the pandemic as evidence of that. I think what we were all universally reminded of is our just innate human need to feel genuinely connected to other people. And hospitality is the secret ingredient in connection. I think as companies think about just the conditions of the world around them, anyone that does some simple pattern recognition can see the digital transformation that we've all been going through now, the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and recognize that, hey, at least for right now and for a long time, like hospitality, like bringing a genuinely human quality to the work is one of the few things that will separate the good ones.
It's the greatest differential, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at how many industries are struggling to either recruit or retain people on their team, I think people are also recognizing that hospitality is the answer there, or at least trying to figure out what the answer is. And I'm the one saying it's hospitality. Because we're just in a season where I think people have regained their appreciation for this.
Yeah.
And perhaps finally are recognizing that hospitality, connection, human engagement is a craft that can be pursued, a muscle that can be strengthened just as much as any of the other ones. I mean, to kind of like fully land the plane on your last question, you know, there's people that like to give gifts at the holidays and those that like to receive them. I have always tried to surround myself with those that like to give them, but I'm always quick to remind people that we are just as selfish as those that like to receive them, because the gift we get is seeing the look on the other person's face when they open our gift.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's anything more energizing than seeing the look on someone else's face when they receive a gift you're responsible for giving them. And that's why it doesn't take work to keep your team engaged. You just need to show them how good that feels the first time, and then it just becomes self-perpetuating. But when you talk about how to deal with retention and recruiting, you know, so many leaders are doing the same two things right now. They're paying their team more or giving them more balance between work and life, both of which are important and also wholly insufficient, because that's like treating the symptoms and not the underlying condition. The key is to give people a renewed sense of purpose in their work. And in creating a culture of hospitality, you're giving your team the gift of being able to give other people gifts, which is one of the most fulfilling and purpose-giving things we can possibly do. If you don't know that your work has the ability to impact other people in a positive way, it's going to be impossible to give all of yourself on the hard days.
It's kind of the bigger mission, right? I saw a survey yesterday. Gen Z, this young generation, that's the number one thing. Is
Yes.
It has to be a mission-driven. So maybe I'll land and walk off from the corporate America, but what are we getting grossly wrong? When you get done with a day of work in a company and you come home and say, boy, what are you consistently saying, this is the biggest gap? What do we gotta fix to actually create higher engagement that will lead to higher results, especially for this, not just time we're in, but this next generation coming? Gen Z might be one of the more, you know, dynamic, diverse generations that we've ever seen.
Yes.
Is there any?
I mean, you know, on a couple occasions, I'd say two things. I have two things to answer that with. One, you know, when you're overwhelmed, the times you need help are the times you feel the least capable of asking for help. When you're so busy and you're already flailing that it's hard to ask for help. I was speaking at this medical convention, and the first question I got was this guy saying, how many people did you serve a night? And I answered, and he goes, and how many people do you have on your team? And I answered, and he goes, well, we treat this many people a day, and we only have this many people. What you're talking about, it sounds great, but I can't do that. And I said, listen, when I was a kid, my dad, when I was like at that age where I started saying the word I can't a lot, my dad printed up these little fortune cookie paper sized pieces of paper that said success comes in cans, failure comes in cans, and literally hid them all over my world. His whole thing was like, I was not allowed to say the word I can't, which was a little intense, but it got the point across. Also, to your point before, the team will only ever buy into something if they feel optimism and possibility and the ability to achieve that thing from their leader. Yeah. And so I said, if you're saying you can't, then yeah, don't try because you never will. I believe that right now as people are struggling, what I'm asking people to do is actually to invest a little more. Short term, it is harder, but long term it becomes much easier. That's one that I've seen on a few occasions is people already feeling overwhelmed by the headwinds they're facing. And I'm saying, your life will get better, but you actually need to find a little more space and a few more resources and a bit more time now in order to get there.
Which links a little bit to prioritization, right? If you can't create margin in companies or even in your own life, then you cannot reach the state you're talking about if you are in a reactive mode.
Well, and if the leader has no margin, then they don't have an ability to lead.
Yeah,
right?
So
like,
margin's necessary for unreasonable hospitality, but margin's necessary for everything.
Yeah, margin's just necessary for being a good leader because like if someone on your team comes in and they need to be led, they need to be invested in, and you've left no margin in your day to seize on that opportunity, then you're letting people down.
That's good.
The second thing I'll say in terms of like reactions I've gotten, most people are filled with enthusiasm and optimism, and it's been really cool to see people get on board.
It's a radically different approach to engagement, I think, the way you're taking this.
But
the second,
I'm asking people to embrace conflicting goals, which I talk about in the book, how excellence and hospitality are not friends. I'm not asking anyone to stop focusing on excellence. In fact, I believe excellence is a prerequisite for the stuff I talk about. I'm asking them to simultaneously start focusing on hospitality, and pushing those two envelopes simultaneously can feel impossible to certain people. I was on this radio show doing an interview with like one of the top hospital executives in the country. And he was saying, my people need to focus on excellence. And I was like, yes. And hospitality. And
people that are mission-driven, data shows, are more compliant and will deliver excellence because it matters more.
Well, the more you feel engaged in the work, the more you're going to care about the details that culminate in a culture of excellence.
All right, a quick, fast fire I have to ask, because this is the time when you spoke. My wife looked over at me when you said this. Your intentionality on gifting. Give me a 2-minute answer on gifting, because actually who was interviewing you gave a gift to. Remember the reporter and the event we were at? You'd given a special gift to her. But
oh yes, that's right.
Maybe I don't know that, but just we all like to give gifts and receive gifts. You said, but just you have a special philosophy on gifting.
I just think gifting is the most beautiful opportunity, not just to show someone that you spent a lot of money on them, but to show them that you care enough about them to get to know them well enough to give them a gift that is only right for them. One of the things we talk about a lot is the idea that if hospitality is about making people feel seen, the best way to do that is not to treat them like a commodity, but a unique individual. In unreasonable hospitality, one size fits one. And so the greatest gifts I've given and the greatest gifts I've received are ones that if I gave them to you instead of the person I gave them to, you'd be like, what is this? But to them, it was pitch perfect.
Well, the reporter, because she kind of melted as she was asking the question. Do you remember that you gave her a...
Yeah, well, what she was talking about, so I host the Welcome Conference.
Yeah.
It's our hospitality conference. We do it annually at Lincoln Center. And for the speakers, it's not a big budget thing. We don't have budget to pay them. But the night before, we get everyone together at my apartment. We order Chinese food, and we have this ceremony. We have them all together because I believe that one of the central missions of the conference is to create a sense of community amongst the attendees. But if the people on the stage don't feel in community with one another first, I don't think we can achieve
You
that.
can tell it as somebody sitting in the audience. Yeah.
So the way we do that is casual Chinese food, but then everyone sits in a big circle, and me and my team, we spend months. Marin, who you've gotten to know, is like the quarterback of this process, buying a gift for each one of the people, or making a gift. And these gifts take months to buy or make, and we give them the gift in front of everyone else to not only show them how much we see them, but also to help tell their story to others. A couple examples of them are, there's this restaurateur in Chicago, one of the great restaurateurs, and when I was talking to him in advance of the conference, he was saying his kids now run the company, that he'd been keeping a journal his whole life to give to his kids, but now his kids are running the company. I don't even know if they want the journals. So I got in touch with his assistant and got a list of the 30 people that had either worked with him for the longest time or were a part of his family. And we sent them all pieces of paper and had them all write journal entries of the biggest lessons they'd learned from him. And the bookmaker put them into a journal. And that was his gift, to say, like, hey, maybe you don't think they want your journal, but A, I'm pretty sure they do.
Yeah.
And also, you've already taught them journals worth over the course of your life. Things like that. Which, by the way, my favorite thing about hosting that conference
Was seeing the reaction.
is like dreaming up the gifts and then seeing their reaction. But we did.
But like you say, it's relentless intentionality in the time that it takes. It's not 2 days before an event. What do we get them?
Yes.
You say it's wow.
And here's the thing: for people who say, "Okay, that's great. You spend a lot of time on that. I don't have that time." Everyone has time in the day to do something, to do the things they choose to do. And we all need to be looking for things to schedule into our days that don't deplete us and rather energize us. I guarantee you, 20 minutes a day being creative about how to make other people happy will always energize you and make you more effective for all the other things that are cluttering your calendar.
Back to margin, and there's your Matthew McConaughey bumper sticker, right? All right, so listen, we'll go quickly here through some of these others, but part of Shared Table is converging leadership, intersecting with animals.
Yes.
Fats and protein. So I'm going to go on the protein side: meat, milk, cheese, eggs. Center of the plate, some people would say.
Yeah.
The role of protein. I'm just get some of your perspective on this. Give me a little bit of the role of protein, today in food. How significant is it? How important it is today. I want to talk about the future here in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these different trends around plant-based this and that and the other thing, but I still think, the protein, the center of the plate, that is the culmination of most meals. I think when you talk about the emotional significance of protein, like so many of the most important traditions, whether you're at a Korean restaurant getting like a bossam or the roasted turkey around Thanksgiving or my mom's bolognese, whatever it is, like there are these things that represent so much more than just what you're putting in your body, but all the memories and emotional attachments you have to the thing that you're being served. Listen, my dad, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer years ago and went to a complete raw food diet, and that was a big part of how he ended up surviving the cancer, is now eating protein again. Because no matter what people say, there are incredible health benefits to proteins that are raised in the right way. I think when you look at trends, I think it is everything in moderation, right? And I think maybe for a while there, we were just eating too much of certain things, but I think the future should always include sustainably raised protein and done in the right way, not just for health benefits or deliciousness benefits, but all the emotional stuff.
And anything you'd say, boy, you got to it a little bit, but hey, if you were speaking to the industries of people that are in the middle of globally the future of meat, and any insights you would recommend to them?
Yeah, listen, people want to get behind things that they can respect, and the more they know about it, still support. I do think that people are going to be eating a little bit less protein in the future than they have to this point in history. I think that's inevitable, and it's probably the right way to live. But the best way to ensure that protein remains a big part of our collective diets is to make sure it's like ethically produced and almost unimpeachable, right? Because there's a lot of bad actors in that space who I think are giving others a bad reputation. And so I think, like, listen, if you want to survive, as there's all these people that are a little bit too self-righteous, making sweeping statements about protein, and you have to beat them at their own game and like actually, like, to my dad's point, ask yourself what right looks like and do that. And if the industry raises its game a little bit and like rising to the occasion and maintaining the right type of standards, then I think it's going to be a better future for us all.
I agree. And I think globally, the global diet, I mean, the demand, as carbs have come down, protein has gone up. I agree with you. I think it's per capita can change, but globally there's still a lot of room for opportunity. But it's giving people what they want, animals what they need. And I think you touched on another one, and using less environment. We see a climate neutral farm is possible.
Yeah.
And that's where innovation has to come, because then that comes back around to the consumer saying, now I'm really excited about this.
For sure.
There's no footprint created with this protein that I'm eating. I think that's the space we've got to go to. But yeah, it's good. And we got to do it in an unreasonable way. All right, so I want to shift to personal a little bit. You know, Christina and you being able to pull off, if you don't mind me asking, you know, chasing your dreams together. Second child here, Butter the dog. Is that you know, got to get the dog in here. It's a plug for the other side of our business. How do you do this? And I got to tell one story though. My wife would be upset if I didn't. Is when we were with you, Christina's getting ready. You talk about an amazing picture that she remembers. I remember the poke in the stomach. She remembers Christina's getting ready to do a big in the kitchen, a big display and a big, you know, producing of the cakes in front of 50, 60 people, and everyone wants to see her. She's in the back of the room spending one-on-one time with all the people that prepped. I mean, talk about servant leadership. And that's all Annette remembers was that was like, she cared about those individuals individually. I can see the passion she has, and she's built quite an enterprise here in Milk Bar. I guess I'm very curious, just for you, just to tell me a little bit of how do you do this together? What?
You know, it's so funny. For a long time in the beginning of our relationship, we very deliberately never talked about our work at home, because our work was so dominating in our mental headspace that we wanted one another to represent a sense of reprieve.
Yeah.
And that's changed since then, because we've only gotten closer the longer we've been married. And I'll just speak on my behalf. There's no one that I want on my team more than her. And what we've started doing is like really using one another as sounding boards in a way that we didn't in the beginning. And we're just as intentional in doing it now as we were in not doing it then. But we're also good at knowing when to turn it off.
Yeah, okay.
I talk in the book about oxygen and how, as a leader, you need to figure out what your oxygen is and then give your space to do that. Because in hospitality or hospitality and leadership, it's like you are constantly pouring water from your pitcher into someone else's glass. And if you don't refill your pitcher, you're going to run out of water pretty quickly.
And where do you get your oxygen?
And so we get our oxygen individually in different ways. She loves going for long runs. I love ordering Chinese food and binge watching bad TV. But together, we just like to pretend we're little kids again and just be silly and laugh. And The other day we were driving with our kids in the back and they were not being the best versions of themselves, and we just decided to play Dave Matthews Band loud and start singing and introduce them to it. And suddenly, like in a stressful moment with kids, my wife and I are reliving our high school days and just laughing hysterically. And I think the beauty of a good person by your side is, you know, like a switch. You can take a moment that could just exhaust you and turn it into one that fills you with life. And so I feel very lucky with her.
Maybe I'll segue to the close here. I'm a big, Will, believer in, as I said, kind of a no regrets life. And I believe there's 3 important days: the day you find your mission and calling, the day you do something about it, maybe it's that second mountain even, and then the day that, hey, when it's getting over, you look back and there's no regrets.
Yes.
And so, you know, a quote I think about, I saw this the other day and I thought of you actually, is, you know, if you think the price of winning is too high, wait till you get the bill for regret.
Oh.
It's generational.
Wow.
And I guess my challenge, I would take you to say, people that live no regrets life, they're not politically correct. Some might even say there's a little reckless abandon. They're bold, they're courageous. They aren't gonna worry about the thief of comparison.
Yes.
They're doing their thing. You are on a mission. I can tell. I pick people out. You're a no regrets person. So I guess my question always is, okay, you're an old man, 100 and whatever. And there's Sonny and Frankie there, and you look and say, hey, what don't you want regret about? What do you want to change? What ultimately is the mission that you're chasing?
Wow.
What is the second mountain look like?
You know, gosh, that is such a good question. When I first bought my company, I was spending time in Seattle, and I was with the elder Canlis of Canlis Restaurant. And he's like, I just want to give you some advice based on my own experience. So many people say the secret to happiness is like separating work from life as much as possible. He's like, I found the opposite to be true for me. I like to let life and work bleed into one another, because otherwise I found myself always consumed with guilt when I was pursuing one that I wasn't pursuing the other. And I've tried to channel that into my own approach in different ways. I obviously want to accomplish a bunch of stuff. I want the things that I do and the work I put out into the world to leave it a marginally better place than when I started. I want to create best of class places and inspire people to think a little bit differently. But obviously, the most important thing is I want to be a great dad. I want to raise great kids. And professionally, my hope is that what is required to be a great dad for them is the same things that I accomplish at work. So that it's not like I'm doing 2 different things, but through one set of non-negotiables, through one set of core values, I'm doing the 2 things simultaneously. If I don't have to compromise the person I know I need to be to do right by them in order to succeed in business, then I don't think I'll have anything to look back and regret.
Wow, powerful. I think don't underestimate too your shadow. They always say the power of a leader's shadow. I think what I've seen in the last year, you're taking servant leadership to a 4.0 kind of level. You're taking companies that need engagement. We need what you have to offer. I think hospitality in an unreasonable way will be looked at, I think, in a more common nature in 10 years. That'll be more central to the company. It'll be on more mission statements, on more walls. It'll be, I really do. So I think this is a little bit of what Drucker did for, leadership and Jim Collins. I think there's an opportunity of what you're doing from Hospitality Inn. So
Thank you for saying that.
maybe to close, using our friend Matthew McConaughey that I know influenced a little bit of your audio book, you told me. Maybe fast fire here as we close here, just some quick little green light bumper stickers here. So just fast fire. Give me your favorite meat dish.
My favorite meat dish is either my mom's bolognese, which, even though my mom passed away years and years ago, my wife reverse engineered by interviewing every single woman on her side of the family to figure out what that sauce was. And she's now learned to create it almost identically to what my mom used to make.
There's gifting.
Or to the point before, my favorite holiday is Thanksgiving. Not for the food. The food's fine, whatever. Turkey is okay, and I love mashed potatoes and all that stuff, but like, that's the holiday I always look forward to most because of what happens here at the table. And so sometimes our response to food is less the food itself, but more the memories that the food evokes. So those would be my two.
It's good. Best fast food?
In-N-Out Burger. Double animal style from
okay.
In-N-Out Burger.
I've got a California child in school there. She would agree with you. Worst fast food? Maybe you don't need to name the restaurant, but what do you prefer not to have?
You know, people go crazy for Arby's roast beef. I just don't like an Arby's roast beef sandwich. It's never done it for me.
Okay, it's good. What would be two of the greatest influences? Whether they're people, maybe we'll take Christine off. We know she is, but two of the greatest influences in your life.
I mean, my dad, obviously, but if we're trying to steer clear of family, Danny Meyer.
Yeah.
And then the second play, I mean, Danny Meyer, because for me, like, I believe that cool, the word cool, is one of the most important words in the English language. And I think people use it far too rarely the older they get and the more responsible or professional they feel they need to be. Because at the end of the day, we never stop being like our high school selves in some small way. People aspire to be cool. Danny Meyer, when I was coming up, was the only person that made working in the dining room, focusing on hospitality instead of food, cool. He gave me someone to aspire to be in a world where no one else was playing that role. And it's something that I want to aspire to be for other people, because an industry will never thrive unless there's young people coming up who think that some of the people doing that are cool. Danny Meyer sits firmly in one of the two positions. On the other side, I'd throw a couple names. I mean, Alan Mulally from Boeing and Ford. And I mean, if anyone has not read the book, An American Icon, read it, because his process-based leadership and his ability to take what he does seriously without taking himself too seriously is resoundingly inspiring. And I've recently started to just become completely obsessed with Greg Popovich and just learning some of the things he's done with his team, not after big wins, but after big losses. And actually, like, some of the biggest celebrations he's had with the team came after some of the most devastating losses.
It's good. Maybe just to end, if someone listening to this, if you'd say, hey, there's one thing you want to take away, or one thing that either hasn't been said or really important, close us out, Will. And I'm grateful to share a table with you.
No, and I'm grateful too.
You get the last word. And we can finish this pizza. So
there we go. I mean, listen, I wrote the book, and I'm really enjoying having conversations like this, because I believe that unreasonable hospitality is a win-win-win. I think it has the capacity to make customers happier, to make businesses more profitable, and to give everyone involved in those businesses a greater sense of purpose and joy in the thing that they spend so much of their lives doing on a daily basis. And so I wrote it just to encourage people that the next time they find themselves pursuing a relationship with someone they work with or someone that they're serving, to just try being a bit more unreasonable, to give people that sense of belonging, to collectively create the kind of memories that could end up being in our autobiographies, to to just do all of those things that feel so good, because yeah, they will transform the business, but they'll make you and everyone around you just feel so much better along the way.
Thank you. Thank you for making me a better leader, a dad, a husband, and inspiring me. I'm getting, chasing the second mountain is an exciting aspiration.
Well, it's a two-way street.
Thank you. Let's have some pizza.
Thank you.
Thanks.